Ladies and gentlemen, as announced earlier, we will be giving gift hampers to the winner with the highest like, and we have two winners till now. Mr. Roshan Koirala, Nabil Bank Limited. I'd like to call him to the stage, and to do the honors, I'd like to call upon Miss Namuna to give the coupon. It's the coupon from Tranquility Spa. Mike. Yeah. And another winner is Mr. Nikesh Singh Maharjan from Nepal Bangladesh Bank. For now, we would like to encourage our ladies to post and get the gift hampers. Now, for further, I'd like to call upon Mr. Sanjeev Subba to introduce our next speaker.
Welcome back. Thank you, Sony. Actually, we still have three more gift voucher to Tranquility Spa. I mean, if you wanted to pamper yourself after a hard day conference, there's an opportunity. Particularly, this opportunity are reserved now for the women. All right. So as I was saying, you still have three more gift coupon to Tranquility Spa for your spa treatment. If you want to pamper yourself, particularly for the ladies participant, so use the hashtag NVI Human Capital into any social media. So even if you have done no likes, I think Sony will find a way to give you the voucher. So on a first come first serve basis, perhaps. I don't know, whatever the rules set by Sony here. So moving forward, so I think like we had a pretty enlightening first half today. A lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of deliberations that came forward from very seasoned professionals. I mean, both, of course, the consultant and practitioners from a different perspective. So that was a very good outcome, I would say, and would allow us to reflect on and perhaps take back, some lead points when we go back to our work and maybe get buy-in from your executives to implement. And perhaps many of these are also associated, from my perspective, with leadership attributes. So if you are able to reflect on from the leadership angle as well, maybe you'd be able to use in your day-to-day practices. So moving forward, we have our last speaker, Mr. Sadhan K. Bhattacharya, who heads the training and development South Asia for Johnson & Johnson Vision Care. So Sadhan, his training and development, as I said, of Johnson & Johnson. He currently holds the responsibility of a change leader to define organizational capabilities and lead future-ready talent framework to create competitive advantage for J&J Vision. I think this would also perfectly fit with the kind of the situation the country or the industry is right now. The key word here is the change. Second keyword here is the define organizational capabilities and lead future ready talent framework. I think based on that, he would be able to share his thoughts, how he's been executing these keywords into his broader vision framework. So he's a credential talent development and learning leader. He's a certified CPLP with at Six Sigma and has over a decade of experience in line of training and development. So a lot of very powerful stuff packed in there with Southern. So with that note, Southern, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanjeev. Good afternoon. Thank you for being in time. Must congratulate and thank Sanjeev in person, NBI, for having us here, specifically me, after we got connected with Sanjeev. It's been a pleasure talking to you quite often. I think the discussion topic that we have decided between me, Sanjeev, Harlina, goes like, thank you for being late. I think some hashtags, some talk about the title of the session now is already set the context. But help me understand, if you wish, anyone from the group, why did I choose so, a title? Better late than never, he says. Maybe one or two show up. Quite innovative. I was discussing the theme for the topic of discussion now with Sanjeev some times back, and we resonated on this theme, seeing where the current stage of HR practices, the talent practices, and learning and development practices in Nepal currently are. And that really brings us to the discussion topic that though it might be a little late on the adoption curve, but still nothing is lost for you folks. And that's an heartening thing, that it's being late, but you are running a definitive advantage. And over next course of 30 to 40 minutes, what I will lay the foundation, why I say, despite you being late on the adoption curve, you do hold a distinctive advantage compared to many of your peers. I would like to deconstruct that whole thing here. However, as a caveat and as a sense of gratitude, let me also thank the prominent writer, author of New York Times, Thomas Friedman, whom you might know through his seminal works and books. The World is Flat is most widely known and talked about the books, but his latest book is by the same name in 2016 called Thank You for Being Late, all talking about digital disruptions. That really inspired me to hold on to this session's topic. However, let me put a disclaimer as it goes there. My session has nothing to talk about his books and his body of work here, okay? Many of you might be familiar with this terminology in technology adoption called leapfrogging. Any idea about what is this leapfrogging all about? It's jumping over. But it's jumping over with certain caveat. And those caveats are, you jump over beyond your normal or the usual capabilities. That's what your leapfrogging is called. But in the technology domain, when you talk about the leapfrogging, you actually are reminded of some of the classical examples of leapfrogging in technology adoption. Very closer to you, back in India, when we revolutionized the telecom industry, which really is a world-class case study across the base school, the telecommunication revolution in India and some parts of Africa so rightfully captures the practices of leapfrogging. Let me give you the meaning of leapfrogging in telecommunication in India. We moved from fixed line telecommunication, telephony, to mobile 4G. Now, the nooks and corners of the country, you can find 4G telephony with ease without having a proper landline in those remote villages. That's a classical example of leapfrogging. In some parts of India, Finland, Africa, you can see another example of leapfrogging here on the middle panel of your visual, which is all about the clean and the renewable energy resources, like the solar energy, the wind energy. Again, a classical case of leapfrogging. If you go into remote parts of China, I am told the postal department of China government doesn't reach out there, but distinctively, the ubiquitous internet penetrates there. That's again a classical example of leapfrogging. What does that mean for all of you? That you have a better quality of life, the demographic dividend that you talk about in terms of the social capital equitable adjustment, you can riff through what we have seen back home in India. The farmers in the remotest part of our country can get the fair real-time quote for their crops thanks to the ubiquitous internet and 4G telephony. That's the power of leapfrogging. Similarly, for renewable energy, needless to be told, we are going through a hell of a climate change and its issues. We have bypassed the traditional thermal energy route. And thanks to the leapfrogging of internet and telephony in China, you have got the benefits of communication getting closer to your near and dear ones. If those are the distinctive advantage of leapfrogging, what does that mean to you in case of learning and development? For far too long, this to function, human resources and learning and development have jostled to get a seat on the table. And still, it continues. The fight to earn a table seat is still on. But we have moved from that era of earning a place on the table to something what I call driving the agenda. Are you happy being part of your executive committee team? Or you would like to have your say aligned with the business priorities, the people priorities, get a dominance over discussion. That's what I call shifting the gears from earning a place on the table, earning a seat on the table, to more nuanced and more strategic and proactive role of driving the agenda. That's what leapfrogging means for L&D and HR practices going forward. In subtle terms of leapfrogging in learning and development, because this might be a conceptual framework, let me break it down to its very to-do list for all of you practitioners. Because if I say from your high pedestal the technological leapfrogging and other examples of leapfrogging, that might sound hollow to you. Let me deconstruct that for you. Leapfrogging, I do envisage in three distinctive areas. One, first in terms of the process leapfrogging. So if you have a certain medieval process of training and development or HR practices in the organization, in the country, possibly you have gotten golden opportunity over next 40 minutes or so to take one or two lessons and points to drive home back in the organizations. We'll talk about process leapfrogging. We'll talk about technology leapfrogging, which is very much pivotal and central, but not the list. We'll talk about talent leapfrogging as well. So process, technology, and talent, these are the key areas that I see leapfrogging is going to distinctively benefit, accrue to each one of you, should you take one or 2 points to carry back home. In terms of process, I saw during the pre-lunch session almost closer to 30% of the hands rising for HR and L&D folks. Does that remain the same? Can I have one more time? Because now you have got the energy intake, so I can have a large show up of hands of HR folks. Those who don't have an L&D direct accountability can lower your hands. I see 4, to be very precise. So when this, yeah, I've counted you, madam. So for this chunk of population of HR and L&D folks, let me now go into nuts and bolts of how this process leapfrogging look like for you, right? For far too long, learning teams and HR teams have played the part of order takers. Does this phrase ring some familiarity with you when I say order takers? Order takers basically are someone whom the business or the leaders come and say, come, folk, you have got these 300 odd people joining the organization and do this training bit. And Pat comes the answer from the concerned leader in training and development or learning, yes, we will. And that's complying to order taking. There's no harm in that, however. There is no question of senior or junior partner there. But the question is of philosophy and approach. From order taking, how you become consultative, what we call performance consultation, is going to be our leapfrogging tool for L&D and HR practices. So being consultative is going to be a distinct virtue. So is the case of the training events. I possibly was looking and quite impressed given the kind of the state currently we are in. Yesterday we saw a whole training calendar, Sanjeev, possibly. That's the eventing of the whole program. A function is eventized across quarters, across months, and maybe possibly some weeks even. That's good. No harm in that. However, the sad part of the learning function happens when you get this as a start date and an end date. You actually is straitjacketing the whole effort on the philosophy, what you call the learning organization philosophy, into a start and end event. Instant, if you have to leapfrog your L&D practices, you have to see learning as an ongoing journey. And hence we call from training events to learning journeys. Does that sound some kind of chord with you? Does that make sense for? That's leapfrogging for you. Talk about the smiley sheets. You folks know about smiley sheets? It's all about your feedback. If you have trained, if you have run an HR workshop in your organization, at the end of it, most likely you have run a feedback activity. That's what we call smiley sheet. Those are outdated, outmoded. However, those are relevant in certain contexts. But if you have to leapfrog your practices in terms of process leapfrogging, you have to move beyond smiley sheet into what we call impact evaluation. Talk about leapfrogging in terms of technology. We have spoken about LMS, and possibly later the panel discussion also have got some element of LMS and its nuances. But it's time most of the big organizations across the globe are now writing obituary for LMSs. The old-fashioned LMSs are gone. Now the era for what you call agile LMSs. You might ask me what that sound like. An LMSs, if you have ever used or known one, is something that you manage the learning function and its activities and data keeping and record. It's highly static in nature. You assign certain compliance courses, people do their bit of it, you get it registered, you possibly print out at the end of a certification of completion, you hang it on the wall of your cubicle, and that's it. To leapfrog in terms of technology, the LMSs are bringing in elements like social elements. You have got interactive discussion board there. You can ping your buddies of learning environment and run a context there. So there are leaderboard likes, there are game elements which are coming up. One of the biggest challenges that technology has in terms of adoption in learning fraternity was the cost. It used to cost a bomb, no less than a couple of $1 million to run a mid-size execution of an LMS project. And for many of the CEOs and CFOs, signing this check is always a troublesome thing. You are now getting lightweight LMSs, which cost a fraction of it, has much of the desired elements built into, like the socials and the gamification and more effective. So that's leapfrogging in terms of technology. From classroom sizes, which are now increasingly getting shrunk. I'm not saying or writing an obituary at this point in time for classroom trainings, but gone are the days of large 45 days orientation program. When I joined the industry way back in 95, my first onboarding experience was of 47 days. Hardly any organization is left at this point in time, except for some of the organizations like Infosys of the world, which has got a rigorous 6 months coding onboarding programs back in Mysore campus. But very few organizations remain such long period of classroom training. So what I'm saying, from very prominent importance towards the classroom or instructor-led training into what you call the adoption of the new technological means, whether it is a micro-learning, whether it is bite-sized learning, whether it is digital platform, social learning, that's technology leapfrog in terms of delivery. You talk about LMS and push learning. No longer it's going to be sufficient and enough for the learners of today. Specifically, if you have got the Gen Ys and Gen Zs coming in the workforce, your push learnings are going to be restricted only for the compliance part of it. Most of the development-led learning on an ongoing basis would be delivered through what you call personal learning networks. You might ask me, what is personal learning networks? If you have got Facebook at workplace, because there is an element of Facebook at the workplace. If you have got the ESNs or enterprise social networks, like the Yammers, if you have got Link of the Microsoft world, these are all your personal learning mechanism. I personally believe a great fan of LinkedIn as my own personal learning network. So what I will urge and suggest to you as learning and HR leaders and even executives, find your personal learning networks that suits you the best. Encourage your teams to adopt one of these media. Maybe it's a Twitter, maybe it's a LinkedIn, maybe it's a Google Hangout, whatever it works for you. So that's a technology-enabled leapfrogging for you. No longer company-sponsored LMS-driven learning is going to be sufficient for the modern workplace. In terms of talent, what is leapfrogging in talent? Earlier, how many of you have got work X of more than, say, 10 years? Roughly, maybe a quarter of the population, or less than even. If I do the same polling, possibly 2 years down the line, this number will further get shrunk. It's the economy of gig talent. Body shopping is coming up in a new avatar called gig economy. During my day's work, I might be employed with a couple of employers, not sticking to my one lifetime employment. Maybe a little fanciful thing at this point in time here, but never you mind, given the kind of disruptive changes that the technology is unleashing on us, the pace of this development will be further expedited, even in your country. There are pros and cons, debates to be done. Even recently, the parliament in UK debated about the gig economy, its pros and cons. Even the more matured economy of the world would have its flip sides cited for Uberized talent. But that's definitely going to impact us in one form or the other, in one degree or the other, it's going to impact us. That's leapfrogging for talent space. talk about L&D function, HR function as support function. How often you talk about HR or L&D as support functions? We talk possibly without minding the words and the associated meaning. We talk of L&D as support function. I have a personal detest on that frame. It's not a support function. It's not a back channel function anymore. It's a business enabling function, provided you position that with your executives and leader the way it is supposed to be. And that's precisely the reason in the earlier part I say it's no longer enough for us to have a seat on the table, but you have to drive the agenda. And in order to drive the agenda, you have to partner with the business by thick and thin. When you talk about learning space, mostly known as instructional designers and delivery, these were the primary two body parts of learning function for far too long. There are specialized COEs for instructional designers, but it's now going to morph into what I call co-creation. Personally, back at Johnson & Johnson, whenever we have got business-related workshops created, and at precisely this part of the year, Jan, Feb, March, we run an annual summit events, which is a co-creation between the marketing vertical, the sales training vertical, and the sales organization, where even the business managers contribute writing elaborate case studies. Because who better than a business leader or a business manager can bring the nuances and the intricacies of a customer and its challenges? It's all about co-creation. So leapfrogging for me in learning space is move over the ISD era, and it's all about co-creation. The second part that you can read here, possibly Herlina spoke about curation. As executives in today's digital space, the executives are supposed to possess certain social skills and competencies. And one of the social skills and competencies of the leaders today is curation. It's no longer enough for us to know a subject matter of certain competency, but you have to go be an agent who can curate for you. What is the meaning of curate? If I go in the morning to the office and spend, say, half an hour before my work usually begins, I scan through my personal learning network, and possibly at the end of it, maybe after 5-6 minutes immediately, I get to know that there are 2 or 3 resonating themes or the learning pieces that I can circulate among my own network of leaders. That's a curation on my part. Now, compare the curation part of learning to creation part of it. We have seen the worlds and the various vendors who used to create or who still continue to create programs for us. And they will continue to be. But they are now getting a serious challenge, and rightfully so, through effective curation. So you have made the learners accountable and a participant in creating and designing the program, developing the program. And in certain progressive organizations, I even see that's happening. You have got the co-facilitation from the leaders. Yesterday, I was talking with the selected group. One of the significant roles that I envisage for the coming days, which is expected of the leadership, is to teach. A good leader is a great teacher. Let me repeat that. Let me cite an example from my own experience. Before Johnson & Johnson, I worked for far too long with an organization called Merck, MSD. It's an US pharma multinational, where I knew for sure my managing director had blocked his calendar, annual calendar, 3 days to teach his -1, -2 levels, where he used to encourage his immediate reports to teach the learners or the group of, say, 20-odd or 30-odd high potential senior executives on certain themes. Possibly one of the finest examples I have seen, leaders acting as teachers in such forums. That's leapfrogging for us. So I will possibly moonshine on what uh, Nishchay has already spoken elaborately, but I will take a couple of leaps out of there and quickly ponder over some of the emerging trends in learning space. Maybe the reference and the source would be a little different. However, the underlying themes remaining by and large the same. Here is 2017 Deloitte study that pinpoints very clearly, and this is not just in isolation. There are several studies which have proved beyond doubt that possibly number one or number two agenda of most of the CEOs globally is of talent. If you look into the line items that I have encircled out there, all in one way or the other is the capability building or the talent management being the pressing agenda for global CEOs. If that be the underlying theme or the trend, let's ponder over what's going on. With the disruptive forces, we are talking about the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which means there are the forces of artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms, robotics, which are forcing tremendous pressure on the future of work. If you look into this graph, there is a very interesting trend. The pace and the size and scope, the speed and scope of the technological progress over the last 4 decades have been phenomenal and exponential, something more beyond than exponential with technology. But as an individuals, we have always lagged adoption of technologies. Worse, even when it comes to technology adoption by organizations, they are even far behind. Forget about the laggards such as governments and other agencies. So if that be the future of work staring at us, shouldn't we be taking note of the emerging trends, what possibly before the break Nishchay was pointing out, and some of the research here you can also resonate with. Possibly you do a Google on future of work, and these words come down heavily through your searches. Don't you? You have got artificial intelligence, you have got robotics, you have got machine learning, you have got algorithms, you have got possibly deep learning. I mean, there are so much of these jargons out in their Google or the web world that possibly most often than not, instead of making things clarified for us, they confuse us all the more. How do you make meaning of all these trends then? And that precisely over next 15 minutes or so, I will be trying to make a kind of a sense-making effort with all of you here. How does that relate to you? And here is this 2018 CEB, Corporate Executive Board finding, which talks about the emerging trends, but they made our lives a little bit easier, I would say. At least personally, I felt that the CEB report was a little more comforting to us because they made distinct 3 buckets for us to learn. Learning channels, they aggregated all these trends into 3 distinct buckets. The first, they talked about the learning channels. Mind you, if I have to make a small effort to make you understand this complex chart, which seemingly it looks like a complex wave, here are some of the, oops. Does it have a laser pointer, by the way? It doesn't work. So on the bottom, you can see the adoption level, the impact, and the future investments. So you read it like this. The innermost core of this wheel, you have got a darker color. That means those are already embedded with the workflow. Those are already being practiced. If you look into the impact size, the size of the bubble will give you how impactful those have been. I will just give you an example. And if you look into the color of the investment, the green color is where the future investments will come. For example, if you go into classroom-based learning, if I wish I could show you, that's there on the red dot on the middle line, middle band. What does that mean? It's still being adoption stage in most of the companies, in many of the companies, which is quite surprising. But if you look into the color of that, it's going down. The future investments are going down for classrooms. That means classroom importance are going to shrink in the days to come. Contrast that with some of the other things. For example, e-learning modules. Despite many of us talking negatives about the e-learning platforms and so on and so forth, you still see that's being very much part of the integrated work stream and where future investments are going to be heavier. That's greener. The second part of it, they talked about in learning methods. There you can read it for yourself, and so is the case for LMS features. I'll spend some time here on LMS features. If you look into the gamification, this is one area that almost 4 years back came on the screen very loudly. It was in the space which most of the people talking about the learning, people talking about gamification. I'm not sure how it is currently here, but back in India, every company was going gaga over. And some of the vendors, they really minted money out of that. But look what happens. Within 4 years, that popularity, that adoption has fizzled down, and future trend, they say, the future investment is going to be even further less. So distinctively, the CEB study made our life a little easier in terms of bucketing those trends, in terms of learning channels, learning methodologies, and the technology adoption through LMS and other things. How does that make sense for you? Learning maturity model, which my friend Nishya talked about, I'll give a slightly different twist. What's your understanding about learning maturity model and its adoption curve? If you look into the current context in Nepal here, after having an initial conversation with Sanjeev, if you could just for the gatherings, if you could make a relational statement about where do you see the current maturity model of Nepal HR practices or L&D practices vis-a-vis, say, for example, in India, per se.
I mean, as I think I've said this in the morning as well, we're evolving, we're getting there. We're just at the, I would say, premature stage right now. In terms of, I mean, HR has been there since last over 2 decades, particularly at the corporate, largely within the finance, banking and financial industry. But the L&D is, it's not that we've not been training, right? We've been training like it's under one hat, everything. Yeah, CNB, talent acquisition, HR, and when you were saying like order taking, we are at the stage from order taking to the like leapfrogging stage right now. So largely when he said order taking, it is the kind of the, we are being, most of the HRs are being used as a mailbox in the country still. When I say mailbox or order taking, it is like, you know, all right, I need this many people. You need like issue the transfer orders. So carry out the performance appraisal, you know, like award the promotions, or like, you know, that kind of stuff. So they are not being used still as a strategic business partner. Many of them actually are too far away from the ground realities of understanding the business domain or business vertical. For example, you know, many of the HR professionals here have never worked in a core banking area, but they were to hire risk professional, they need to understand, you know, like what does a risk professional would take, or compliance professional would need to be, or for example, a retail banker, or, you know, like, or internal audit. So they would need to actually envision, I think they are going through a very hard time through their own learning curve, trying to understand each of these position verticals. So in a sum up, I think we have a mixed bag. These people actually are overworked in terms of trying to understand lot of, in terms of trying to run the several errands, you know, like several errands in the brown bag, and to deliver to the, you know, whoever that master or like top level executive to. So it is, I think, I hope you got that.
Thank you, Sanjeev, because precisely that's what he counseled me when I was preparing for my presentation, I just got up with him because I needed to have a first-hand feel about, I can't make a comment which I possibly don't have a first-hand experience with. Given that maturity model, I would like to examine for yourself, how does that look like? I think many of you might know this seminal work from Peter Senge from MIT, talked about the fifth discipline, and he was the first person in the world who has coined this terminology called learning organization. Though still it remains a distant dream for many of the organizations across the globe, across industries, to be truly a learning organization. But he wrote this seminal work 35 years back, and what he talked about still holds as a gold standard. I would highly recommend to HR folks out here, the L&D folks out here, to have a copy of this book called The Fifth Discipline. Though it's a little bulky one, but does make sense for a good read if you really are academically inclined. Let's see the practical capability maturity model. One of the models that really resonate with me is from Josh Bersin from Deloitte. He talked about all the training function across the globe, no matter which maturity stage currently they all start in some way at the very bottom with incidental training. That's precisely what I will resonate with you when you say that mostly these are all inbox or mailbox activity. It moves, by the way, with the leadership kind of commitment that we have seen since yesterday, today, and sitting through these presentations and these sessions throughout the day does make that walking the talk. That's where you develop it to the next stage of T&D excellence. I hope and pray that the T&D and HR practices in Nepal matures to this second level sooner than many of the peers. Then you have got the integration with the talent management, because if you talk about learning and development without the mention of talent piece there, which has to be nicely integrated, it has to be the centerpiece. I am more than sure it is just half the 50%, because unless you do the developmental work, your L&D initiatives are going to be just 50%, whatever you do at your excellence. That's where the level 3 comes in. And as in whole, when you do that, you start building the organizational capability. And that's where the maturity journey begins, and which I believe nicely fits with even the PCM. For those of you who are uninitiated with the capability maturity model, it is basically the software industry benchmark or the framework of ascertaining where their capability of development of software remains. But interestingly, the human resources functions across the globe have adopted well to this, and they have renamed this as People Capability Maturity Model, PCMM. There is a nice similarity between both the models. The whole purpose of showing all this information is just to recognize the fact where you currently lie and what is the way forward for you. For example, if you are there on incidental training, the next logical step for you to move forward is to have a structured training and development function so that you drive towards functional excellence. And then you add the part of talent practices there. You are there on the level 3, and then you move towards the organizational capability maturity model and developmental initiatives. No wonder, 3 years back, the world's largest professional learning and development organization that used to be once American Society for Training and Development rechristened itself to ATD, Association for Talent Development. No wonder, it's just not the changing of the name, it's a change in philosophy. So when I was talking to Tony Bingham, the CEO of ATD in Mumbai maybe 3 years back, that time they were just planning to do this name change. And he actually took the pain to elaborate why this makes a sense, a compelling case for change in the name, just to embody what the philosophy lies for the entire fraternity of the professional called learning and development professionals. So as you move upwards from being incidental training partners to your organization to more proactive learning and development professionals and functions, you have to factor in invariably the talent piece into it. And that's where the magic starts beginning. Now, with all these philosophies, all this competency framework, all this maturity framework, let's now get our hands dirty. How do you execute that? I'm sure that is the big question in all of your mind, and let me give you distinctive 4 different steps to go there. But before that, here are some of the statistics worth poring over. Just a quarter of the respondents say that their learning strategies were aligned with the business strategy. And then we see, why don't we earn a table seat, live aside driving the agenda? If my learning strategies are not aligned with the business strategies, and this is as recent as 2017 and 16 reports. I'm not talking of donkey's years back. 60% of the CEOs said that their HR teams and philosophy needs a complete revamp and rehaul. And then if you have to drive the agenda on the table, almost 96% of the CEOs said that they expect the learning strategies and initiatives to impact one of the 5 of their business imperatives. Unless we play partners, consultative partners to the business, we can never reach there. Very interesting. How can a CLO drive an agenda on the table if the separation between a CLO and a CEO is more than 3 layers? And that precisely is the case. Look, there are certain things where possibly we have got very less influence on. These are the organizational structures, organizational philosophy, where possibly my friend can do very little. But let's get into the areas that are perfectly within our influence area and where we can drive the agenda. There's no point in having a craving over the things where possibly we have very little role to play, such as org structure, very little role to have a say. But within our means, how do we play our own game to the fullest? That's the area that we should be looking here. So before we go into those 4 areas that I talked about, let's sum up what are the evolving role of learning professionals coming as. They are increasingly being viewed from away from support function to what I call business enablers. But in order to earn this title of business enabling function, we must be in the thick and thin and in the shoes of the business where it pinches the most. We have seen the maturity curve there on the PCM or the L&D maturity model. Increasingly, the role of learning function is being viewed as organizational capability developer. Are we doing enough? The very central and integral part of talent is going to be the centerpiece for all the L&D efforts. Only learning interventions in isolation is not going to stick for long, unless we have taken care of the talent piece integrated with it. And finally, increasingly CLOs are being sounded out as close confidant and advisors to CEOs. So if those are the 4 lofty roles that we are envisaging for our CLOs or the chief learning officers or even a learning leader, how are we doing there? What are the levers that we must activate there too? And that's where these 4 fundamentals I spoke about, it all starts with what I call the basics, which still is a gold standard called performance consultation. Very early in my career, somewhere 10 years back, someone gave me a very crucial lesson in performance consulting. And I find my framework of 4S model of performance consultation still holding very solid ground. I would be interested to share those offline, of course, because that's not part of my presentation. But if some of you are interested, I will mail the stuff to Sanjeev so that you can look into that. It still remains a gold standard in engaging with your stakeholders. You have to be consultative in your approach vis-a-vis order takers. When I say begin with the end in mind, that's precisely what every training initiatives at the ground must start with. Popularly in Hindi, we say back home, whenever my team comes back with certain requests, I often ask my teams, or my leaders ask this team to their respective team member, because we have got a branched COE model of learning in my organization. Aakhir chahta kya hai? The Hindi phrase is, aakhir chahta kya hai? When someone from the business makes a request, we need to train, say, 250 of our associates over the next 3 weeks' time on this XYZ. The first mantra to my team is, pause a while there, take a deep breath, and ask a couple of questions, which has to be consultative in nature. At the end of it, what do you expect, Mr. CEO, from this investment, or for investment of time and effort? If you can get the business stakeholders articulate those one or two things, you are making your life as well as the other person across the table much easier. And very less chances later on in the entire framework of any conflict. I talked about crowdsourcing and curation. That's where, when you begin your course design, developmental initiatives, because some of you might be also directly or indirectly involved with instructional designing. If not fully, soon you will be involved with that. Because if you have to mature your learning functions from here, some of you need to play the role of instructional designer, because you cannot solely and fully rely upon external vendors for obvious reasons, because you need to create some stuff of your own. They're the role of crowdsourcing. And that's, again, it's not the usual practice, but if I'm talking about leapfrogging, your crowdsourcing has to be. Talking of when you design a particular courseware, bring in the element of design thinking. Again, possibly 23 million, I'm told, Google search for this word called design thinking. It's all about giving the user experience. If you go into the bulky LMS, can you please show me a hand if you have any form of LMS in your organization? You are an LMS person, I will. So maybe you will have soon an LMS, but one of the things I'm cautioning forehand, because we live in the era of Uber, we live in the era of Airbnb, or back home in India we call Oyo rooms. I saw a couple of Oyo signboards here as well in Kathmandu. So these are what you call the shared economy space, where everything is all about user experience. How many times do we now go to a movie hall to buy the tickets? At least in India, most people now book online through bookmyshows.com or something of that sort. It's all about user experience. If that is the case for every interaction, right from waking up early in the morning, doing your net banking part of it, and every other thing, how can we expect my learner to toil through the rigors of the old-fashioned LMS and access and complete the task? It can only happen in certain quote-unquote compliance-related modules, whereas possibly Nishya was pointing, he will click through the pages just to record a green signal. You have completed the course, get the certification printed, but no learning. You have done the training bit of it, but no learning. So learning designers, increasingly some of you will actively play the role of that, have to factor in what you call the user or learner experience here. And we are going towards what we call digital or mobile first. Most of the learning contents are going to be increasingly pushed on to your handsets, whether it is a mobile phone, your iPads, or tablets. In fact, someone made a very interesting comment. He happens to be a learning thought leader across the globe, and he's shared almost 10 days back, we were chatting up, that your learning strategy should be not to pull the learners to your learning platform. Rather, you have to make learning platforms so agile that they rightfully find their learners. A little of philosophical tone, but makes a lot of sense. Your learning strategies and content must find the learners. And that precisely happened, whether being told by your immediate supervisors and managers, more often than not, several times in a typical day, you must be Googling the stuff that you need information on. That's what it means, that the learning content must find the learner. Third piece of it is you have to increasingly embed entire learning effort and delivery with the real-time work. So increasingly, work is learning and learning is work. We have spoken about the shrinking size of classroom, which is further going to diminish. I'm not yet writing the obituary note for classroom. That's never going to happen, I do understand. 10% will still continue to matter. But increasingly, the selection of the courses and the programs for classroom is soon going to be very shrunken. Gone are the days of 45 days onboarding, 47 days onboarding. Bolus versus drip learning. How about having everyone in the sales team attend a 2 days workshop on negotiation? That's one way of doing. That's the captive 16 hours of learning, very high intensity. Maybe rightfully so for an experiential learning curriculum such as negotiation. But is that going to be enough? Will all the learners after the classroom is going to be master negotiator? Possibly not. You have to supplement then through intermittent reinforcement, what we call periodic and intermittent reinforcement. And that's where the concept of bolus versus drip learning. Drip, you know, someone is given those saline drips in the hospital. So is the case for learning. It has to be in bite size, just in time, where I require a tip on negotiation, maybe before visiting the tough client on my way. If I can access something on my mobile phone, on my iPad, on some trivia, for example, if you have a fastidious customer, how do I just make the physical shift in the negotiation table or the setup? Because studies have proven two parties negotiating face to face always have some kind of psychological barrier come in, because they say us versus them. Shift the physical location. I'm just taking the stuff a little bit away from our core discussion. And if someone on my mobile phone pops up, hey, mind about your seating arrangement with the party you are negotiating with. I'm more attuned and mindful about some of the body languages of the negotiator, because negotiation is possibly as much as with unspoken words as it's through spoken words. So that's what I call just-in-time drip learning vis-a-vis the bolus learning. Job-embedded coaching and mentoring. You have happier, more productive, engaged employee with on-the-job embedded coaching and mentoring programs. I possibly would differ with one note that Herlina in the morning spoke about. I'm a firm believer, being a Six Sigma professional, that unless I measure something, I don't measure the impact that it has or otherwise. In fact, my Six Sigma was all about learning effectiveness evaluation with Merck. So unless I have demonstrated what impact in the rightful manner, so the designing of the matrix of impact is important. Not all programs of your compliance will have a direct impact on the commercial outcomes. But you have to find out and single out which are those metrics which are relevant for the kind of programs that you run. You have to establish some kind of framework of impact evaluation. Unless you have shown the return on the dollar spent, you are not going to be counted seriously by the C-suites. That's it. sustainability, at the end of the day, many people or many learning leaders, they have got cold feet when we talk about learning evaluation and impact. Because they say they have got this most common complaint to make. Me and my team are dead sure and serious about evaluating the programs and impacts. But it's the other side which doesn't reciprocate. Unless you have made the business a partner in crime, quote unquote, where you ask clear questions for the business stakeholders to bring forth to the table for impact evaluation, because the change in behavior after any learning intervention has to be seriously driven through the managerial or immediate supervisor-led initiatives. So those kind of coaching, mentoring has to be factored into. So after all this talk about these 4 pillars of leapfrogging, my question loud and clear to all of you sitting here, though you are a little late on the adoption curve, can you pull it through? I firmly believe with leapfrogging, you can and you must. It's a resounding yes to the leapfrogging of HR and L&D practices in Nepal. And I've got every reason to believe that you guys can pull it through, given the executive and leadership commitment we saw yesterday. So just a small example, if you can.
As faculty, staff, and students came out on Leap Day to support what they hope will be the next world record for the fastest leapfrog. The hopes of setting the world record rested in the leaping abilities of one guy, senior Chris Sentmeyer. His goal was to keep everything legal.
Make sure that it's in regulation, 2 hands on back, 2 hands in the air, and make sure that it goes 1, 2, 3 quick.
He says visualization did not play a role in his pre-leap preparation.
I have not had dreams about it, but I'm sure once I hold that record, I will go home and I will dream of fame and glory coming from my leaping abilities.
His leaping was at times pure poetry. Nothing would stand in his way of making history. In the end, Sentmeyer completed a record 32 jumps in only 23 seconds, good enough to set the world record. Diane Yee says Sentmeyer was the perfect choice to be the frog.
He's just a fantastic student to work with. He's always trying to be a part of something. So, and with his lanky legs, I think it really helped get over 32 people.
Members of the community say they were thrilled to be a part of the record-setting event.
To get in the Guinness World Book of Records and say you were a part of it, that's pretty good. Plus, relive a child.
So I believe you don't have to jump over 32 subjects here, only 4. With distinct visualization by the leaders here, Sanjeev, and planning and preparation, I'm sure you will come closer to 32's world record. With all the best and all the support, unconditionally supported and given on the table, I stop here. If you have any questions here, I will be happy to take a couple of questions. In terms of the brass tacks on those 4 things, if you want to have some perspective, I encourage you to fill your questions now. I saw 3 hands going up when I asked for who are those specific to L&D here. Can you please raise? Okay. While mentoring.
While mentoring an employee.
The new employee, new recruit, I mean, the 3 essentials.
Okay. So I will definitely compliment you to talk about, to have this topic of mentoring up for discussion, at least for the next couple of minutes. Thank you for that. When you have got a new employee, I will cite example back home in our organization, what we call, we have a robust 6 months new hires onboarding program. It runs for 6 long months, where we have got 3 different parties actively got involved into: the hiring manager, the immediate supervisor, and the concerned learning, what we call lead. So these 3 people, alongside the new hires, they build this formal discussion of mentorship, what we call the new hires productivity ramp-up program. Essentially, there are certain lead indicators, there are certain lag indicators. For example, the lead indicators would have some kind of program expectations. For example, after this 12 days of new employee orientation program, which are essentially the classroom program, these new employees are let go to their respective territories. They are assigned certain periodic programs on their mobile phones. So are they taking up those programs seriously? Their completion rate, their scores, and so on and so forth are the lead indicators of engagement. Coming to the lead indicators or lag indicators, you have the sales numbers budgeted for them, because we are primarily a sales and marketing organization in India. So sales accomplishment on various metrics are some of the discussion points. But more importantly, the feedback on the job coaching by the immediate supervisor is of utmost significance. So we ask the new employee to articulate the 2 things that they would like to accomplish over the next 6 months period, both in terms of the behavioral skills, since it being a sales and marketing heavy organization, the selling competencies, and those are closely tracked and mentored with active participation for the immediate supervisor and the learning lead. So that's the general climate of mentoring in our part of the world. Hope that helps.
Add on to what you're saying. Basically, you wanted to, like, get the reflection on how the HRs, like, because you people are recruiting and then the new recruit comes, what are the key, like, first week or first month or first quarter. That kind of component, I think from my perspective, when I'm discussing with your executives or even like HR people, that onboarding is missing. Onboarding is there, but the structured onboarding is pretty like hugely missing in the banking industry. For example, we get, let's say we hired trainee assistants or the tailors or at the assistant level or at the MT level both. These are the 2 major entry points. Just trying to relate to what you guys been doing day in and day out. So typically, I mean, what we do is we place an ad or engage outsource company, like, to get me the recruits. Then the recruits comes on board. Only since last 1 or 2 years, these people are like either given an in-house program or sent to some vendors like NVI for like, some kind of a structured program, but that is a one-off basis or one-time basis, right? Then they go back into the organization, they are placed into the branches, and they start like functioning with loose supervision and mentoring. And actually some of these kids are being ping-ponged from branches to branches, even at the case of management trainees. Management trainees are without orientation, and many of these people who may have come from B school, enter as a management trainee, but they were not actually given a proper orientation or onboarding at a very, very 18th century rudimentary stage, like that kind of a stage. So what, from your perspective, when you related that to Johnson & Johnson practices or other multinational practices in India, we're still kind to encourage these people to first, in terms of recruitment, let's say talent acquisition is the recruitment. Within the recruitment, then the onboarding, structured onboarding, structured onboarding from the job vertical level. Basic non-negotiables, what they need to have at the entry level. Let's say tailor, assistant, trainee assistant. Whether you send them to account opening desk or clearing stuff, or the credit back office or the credit stuff, or the tailor or the reception or the sales, there is no separate selling job. This is again this is what we are encouraging them to create an entry level separate selling positions, because then there are RMs or BMs who mostly responsible for selling targets into banking industry, or I think same goes for insurance or like any other industry too. So I think first realization for our industry leaders or people who are in this room or at the industry is to assign a structure kind of onboarding, at least to get start with, right? So we can play with that model for at least 2 or 3 years and see where do we then, from that on, we can move to the next level of the transition. So that is where one and another. When I said empty, I feel, I mean, I've said this again like many times in the past, at least for last 6, 7 years. I feel sad that how we are treating the MTs, to be very honest. We to recruit them through a very rigorous process, and we considered them as like, coming out of the top talent from the top business school. But the moment, and we actually put in top executive heads to recruit them. MT's recruitment and these assistant recruitment are gone through the, at least in your banks, go through the different processes. At least for the MT, you may engage your chief manager, senior manager, or even DGM level, or even in some bank, I've seen the CEOs are even involved in terms of selection of the MTs. But the moment these MTs come to the bank, they are lost in the crowd. We make them like, we send them to branches. I feel very sad about it. When your banks, recruit MT, and immediately within a week or two, you send them to the branches. From my perspective, at least you should handhold them for at least 6 months. And then, one, we do that, and second, by default, by exposing them to branches and to the larger masses, one, unionized masses, one, clerical mentality masses, and then these minority talented MTs get sucked into the majority complaint mongers, and they, after a year or so, your talented MTs just clone out to become like one of those union types or clerical types people. So I think the onus, the responsibility is at our side. We have like multi other challenges. To cut it short, I think first stage for us is to crack it, at least put up a 6-month structure. It's not a rocket science again. I think at the entry level, these people are very much capable enough to assign a structure, non-negotiable kind of orientation onboarding, and then based on that, the vertical they move into. Some of them move into cash vertical, or like operation vertical, or sales vertical. Then those kind of skills could, as you move along, you could go at it. It might sound very like, people like coming from KPMG, or like, for you or Hurlina, it might sound very, very unkosher. But this is the reality here. We have to go by the practicality of the situation, with the ground realities, and trying to get, those loose ends tight first before hoping and before getting romantic about the big knots that we want to, like, untie. So these are the issues, I think.
Couldn't have agreed more. I mean, initial handholding does make all the difference. I'm more than sure many of the senior leaders and folks here would remember their first couple of weeks journey through any organization. I still remember fresh in my mind 95 when my regional manager welcomed me in my sales territory. Still lingers so fresh, and I'm sure the same kind of experience as you would cherish. Think that to be the case, so successful with you folks, why not that be passed on to the next generation? And hence, the question of mentoring the new hires or new employee onboarding is so critical. Thank you for bringing that up for discussion.
That actually very good discussion, deliberation. Many of you have visited this bank called ICICI and seen their campus in Bangalore, or some of your executives. I have taken them to see the campus, this partner called IFBI, not the IFBI, the NIIT like initiative. I mean, these are the initiative, not too old. I mean, it's only last 1 decade. These banks also cracked it. These are the huge $100 billion balance sheet size bank with a $1 billion kind of, profit. But these people have only cracked it in last 10 years. It's not been there in DNA or culture for long. For us, so we are not too far, we still, as you rightly said, leapfrogging, and thank you for being late. Actually, thank you for being late. We're late. But late means, we're not losers. We're already getting there in terms of thinking ahead, and I appreciate, yesterday evening engagement at my office with the executives and your CEOs and DCOs. And I really want to congratulate and thank you so much to senior executives sitting here whole day. Mr. Bhatnagar of SBI and Mr. Rajiv Jain of Everest Bank Limited. I mean, these are the leadership. So things are changing, and many of you, senior, mid-level to senior level people I see in this room, sitting through these deliberation and, discussion whole day, we will, emerge as a winner out of this process. So with that note, I think, thank you so much, Sadan.
My pleasure.
So excellent deliberation. The post-lunch session is really, really difficult, tricky. So, you really, holded us very well. So I think we'll break for tea, and
Sure.
once we come back from tea, we'll have
Thank you.
a very interesting discussion. You have to announce. I think she has more prizes to give out, no? Oh, okay. Good. Anukul, would you like to come hand over token of appreciation to Sadan? Sadan, could I have you on the stage? Chito. So with our note of thanks, Sadan, for the actually that was a very timely and very impactful things that you had said, Sadan.